Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Boer, you began your testimony with the following statement, quote, "We're not here today asking for subsidies." And then toward the end of your opening statement, you proceeded to ask for an expansion of the 22F HUD loan program, which kind of sounds like a subsidy to me because it means the government would have to take on the risk. We're bearing the risk and we're subsidizing that risk. So it feels like subsidies for me, but not for thee. You testified that public policy and regulation can be a barrier to cost-effective, affordable housing construction. I share that view. Do you believe that Trump tariffs fall into that category?
Could you explain roll into that category? I'm sorry.
Do you believe the Trump tariffs raise the cost of housing construction materials, which in turn raise the cost of housing construction, which in turn raises the cost of housing itself?
To the extent our costs are increased, which I will say that we import materials that go into our homes, electrical components. We ship homes with appliances that come from overseas. So to the extent tariffs increase and inflate those products, that drives up costs for sure. And I can't deny, I wouldn't deny, I would completely agree that
it was absent from your testimony, but if we're going to speak about barriers to cost-effective, affordable housing construction, the elephant in the room is the Trump tariff regime, which is not manufacturing housing, it's manufacturing housing shortages.
We should work on all these problems.
I'm an evangelist for the housing abundance movement and a proponent for housing innovation, land use reform, modular construction. The more innovation, the more reasonable regulatory reform, the merrier. But housing innovation is a supplement to, not a substitute for, housing investment. And if you're advocating for housing disinvestment, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Mr. Flew, is it fair to say that housing is a priority for most Americans?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So housing is a priority for the American people, but it's not a priority for Congress. The HUD budget is over $70 billion. The overall federal budget is $7 trillion. Housing is a mere 1% of the overall federal budget. And Donald Trump wants to take that meager 1% and cut it in half at a time when America's facing the deepest affordability crisis since the Great Depression. And Donald Trump is not only seeking to cut housing assistance in half, he's also seeking to impose a 2-year limit on the housing assistance he's cutting in half. And as you know, most heads of households in public housing and Section 8 are working people. These are not undeserving poor people who are gaming the system. These are working people, like my mother, who cannot afford market rate rent. The median rent in New York City is upward of $3,000. How many, can you raise your hand if you know many working people who can afford $3,000 a month? Median rent in Brooklyn is around $4,000. Median rent in Manhattan is $4,000 to $5,000. So if you impose a 2-year limit on rental assistance, what do you think will happen to the working people who live in HUD-assisted housing? Mr. Flew, do you want to take a guess as to what will happen?
A lot of people would lose their homes.
Right, so instead of the working poor, we would have the working homeless. And so the policy choice before us is not a choice between the cost of housing and no cost at all. It is the choice between the cost of housing and the cost of homelessness. Mr. Flew, which is more expensive, both economically and socially, housing or homelessness?
Congressman, I firmly believe that homelessness is more expensive.
By orders of magnitude, right? So in Donald Trump's America, if you're a working class person, you might lose your public housing or Section 8, causing you to pay more for housing. You might lose your SNAP, cause you to pay more for food. You might lose your Medicaid, cause you to pay more out of pocket for health care. And you're not only paying more for food and housing and health care, but you're also paying more for everyday goods and services because of the Trump tariffs, which, by the way, is raising the cost of housing. So again, I'm all for housing innovation, but housing investment is indispensable to addressing the affordability crisis in America. Does anyone disagree with anything I just said? See, there's a consensus. There's bipartisanship in America. So. Modular construction. To what extent can modular construction cut the cost of construction? Do we have estimates on time savings, cost savings?
Just from experience, for us, it's between 10 and 20%.
Okay. And is that national or is that in particular places?
I can only speak for what we're experiencing in Colorado.
Got it. Okay. So look, I feel like it's not either or. We need more innovation and more investment, and I hope we can build a bipartisan consensus for both. I yield back.